Hey all, your OS reviews. In this video, we're taking a quick look at the Moto G 5G 2024 Coach Prime Special Edition. This is a collaboration between Coach Prime, aka Deion Sanders, a celebrity American football coach, as well as Boost Mobile. So this is a limited edition version of the base Moto G 5G that was released earlier this year, and pretty much all of the specs remain unchanged. In fact, you can still find the regular variant of this phone available for sale that can be purchased up front for only $130, very low cost. But what makes the Coach Prime Edition a little bit more unique is going to be the color scheme. Instead of the sage green or grayish appearance of the original variant, it only came in one color. This one just looks a bit more deluxe, using a completely black panel with a gold trim, just makes it pop a little bit more. So regardless of if you're a football fan or not, at least some of these special editions give you more options from a design perspective to choose between. Now, they have collaborated in the past, and some other Coach Prime series devices include kind of the Moto Watch as well as even the Moto Razr. So for fans of foldables, you can find a similarly gold and black treatment on this model, but this is more of a mid-range to higher-end device compared to this being more entry-level. If you are a new customer and you're switching over to Boost Mobile, you can even get one of these Moto G 5G phones for free as long as you purchase a plan when you're visiting a local Boost Mobile store. But like most limited edition units, the quantities might be more limited, so starting here on August 27th, you can find them available, but it may not be continuously sold, unlike the base model in kind of future months and years, depends on when the inventory runs out. Specs of the Moto G 5G include stereo speakers, which are a nice extra for a budget phone that we don't usually see. It's powered by the Qualcomm Snapdragon 4 Gen 1, which is a 6nm processor capable of 5G connectivity. So it is one of the least expensive 5G phones that's relatively energy efficient, has a large 5,000 mAh capacity battery that will last around 2 days of use, 18 watts for charging, and also splash resistant, built out of a vegan leather finish on the rear that's also kind of a unique material that we don't see a lot these days, making it feel a bit more grippy as you're holding it. 128GB of built-in storage that's expandable via a micro SD card slot, and this phone also supports eSIM. So in addition to the physical nano SIM card slot, you can also download a virtual SIM when you're traveling, and it's a feature that we usually see reserved on flagship products like iPhones and Pixels have this, but it's great to see the eSIM compatibility now trickling down onto entry-level phones like this as well. Other top-line specs include a 6.6-inch display. It is a HD Plus resolution as opposed to being Full HD, and it is IPS LCD as opposed to being AMOLED, but those are kind of expected for a budget phone, I would argue. It does have a fast 120Hz refresh rate though, and is protected by Corning Gorilla Glass. It will receive a promised update to Android 15 as well, comes with 4GB of RAM, which is maybe the only spec here that is a little on the lower side, but it has virtual RAM expansion that you can use to augment it up to 8GB, borrowing some of the system storage to simulate RAM, and this phone does have built-in NFC as well, so you can use it for contactless mobile payments, another feature that we don't usually see in many budget phones. So the packaging here just touts some of those features branded with the Coach Prime collaboration there. Just a standard Type-C charging and data sync cable, but there is no wall adapter included, kind of taking a page from Apple in this regard. And the actual phone itself is surprisingly compact and lightweight for a device that has a 5,000 mAh capacity battery. Now, the frame of the phone is still crafted out of plastic, but again, this gold trim I definitely think looks more premium. We have the Motorola logo on the back, which is again treated with this synthetic or vegan leather finish, making it a bit more grippy as well. It's kind of a callback to the days when Motorola did use a lot more textures on their phones. You could pick between options such as, again, leather in addition to wood, and this kind of is a reminder of some of those origins. Camera-wise, we have the 50-megapixel primary lens coupled with a 2-megapixel macro camera. Now, I do think they should have opted for just an ultra-wide angle instead, a lot more practical, but at the very least, the secondary camera can also be used for depth information, and when paired with the main, you can use it for portrait or bokeh effects. Now, on the right-hand edge, you have access to a volume rocker, as well as a power key that has an integrated fingerprint scanner, which is extremely fast to unlock the device, very reliable, and all of these keys do feel pretty tactile and responsive. At the bottom here, we have the 3.5mm headphone jack, kind of a relic of yesteryear that is ironic We only find this on lower end devices, but it makes it a great alternative to something like an MP3 player. Of course, you can use Bluetooth or the stereo speakers instead, which do get quite loud. You have the Type-C port, again 18-watt charging, topping up the battery in around an hour and a half. I also like the fact that Motorola didn't go with a huge camera hump either, so the phone is mostly flat when you're setting it down or putting it into your pocket. What I also like about this particular variant is versus the Moto Razr Coach Prime Edition, that one had a lot more slogans. Some of his notable quotes, like "You gotta believe," his signature, as well as the Boost Mobile logo is even stamped there, and some folks thought it was just too much. On this, it's toned down significantly, and in my opinion, just looks a lot more clean. There's also going to be, again, the SIM/micro SD card slot on the left-hand edge. Now here's a quick size comparison with a couple of other devices, such as the Moto G Stylus 4G. This is the 2023 edition from last year. But we can see a continuation of this modern design language employed by Motorola across most of their devices, whether it's the base Moto G, G Power, G Play, G Stylus, or even the Moto Edge series. So from a, again, design perspective, it's kind of harder to tell apart the flagships from the budget phones, and just makes it look a little bit more expensive than maybe the device actually is. Here's also how it stacks up against another Boost Mobile exclusive we checked out earlier in the year, the Celero 5G 2024 edition. This being another excellent value smartphone, the difference being that the Celero 5G here is a much larger device. It feels substantially chunkier because it houses a 7-inch display compared to 6.6 inches. The camera resolution is higher as well, but definitely protrudes more from the edge of the product, as you can tell. So this is more of a phone that might be comfortable for folks that have slightly smaller hands. Plus 2 more other recent phones. This is the new A15 as well as the HMD Vibe, and these are all kind of in a similar lower end price bracket, but you can tell how the design from afar actually isn't that radically different. That being said, again, the special edition phone definitely, again with its gold trim, just pops perhaps a little bit more, and that vegan finish versus plastic. Software-wise, Motorola's skin on top of Android remains quite minimal and not too obtrusive. We have some of the classics, including the chop chop gesture for activating the flashlight, which you can still trigger here. Alternatively, you can kind of rotate the phone or flick it twice to instantly jump into the camera. Not to mention some subtle UI improvements, like the fact that you can tap on the Wi-Fi shortcut here once just to turn it on or off, compared to stock Android where you have to first tap on the dial and then click it again to turn on or off. So Motorola's launcher simplifies that and makes it a little bit easier to just hit more quickly, saving you on time. You can also find a lot of other Motorola extras on here, such as the Dolby Atmos collaboration that improves on the surround sound experience using the built-in loudspeakers. Other playful extras, including custom fonts, icons, can all be played around with, making the phone feel a little bit more customized. In fact, you get a couple of preset icon packs and also theme packs that you can choose between, allowing you to customize the way the phone feels even further. Other unique gestures include pulling up the split-screen multitasking window with your fingers in a way like so. You're able to then jump into a second application, taking better advantage of the taller aspect ratio. Not to mention a couple of tricks that are perhaps borrowed from Samsung's One UI include attentive display. So it uses the camera here on the top to know if you're still looking at the phone screen, it won't put the display into sleep. In addition, under Moto Secure, you have features like a random pin pad scramble. So this will actually rearrange the numbers on the pin pad as part of their ThinkShield suite of security enhancement features. So this will make it a little harder for someone next to you to guess your password or PIN if you are entering it in this way. Or again, you can use the fingerprint scanner or face unlock, although the face unlock feature isn't quite as secure here. But at this point, we can also tell that the collaboration with Coach Prime kind of ends at mainly just the exterior and the aesthetics. Yes, you have a custom wallpaper that you see here on the home screen, but that is it. Once you actually get inside, all of the other standard apps you also find in a normal Motorola G series device. And of course, if you don't like the special edition wallpaper, you're able to choose between other options based on your preferences. Again, it is a LCD panel compared to AMOLED, which you do find on some of the competitors, such as OnePlus, Xiaomi, as well as even Samsung in their A series are progressively using more AMOLED displays, which give you better contrast and vibrancy. That being said, some folks may still prefer LCD screens for their slightly more color accurate nature. In fact, back in the day, HTC and LG were both well-known manufacturers that stuck to making high-quality LCD screens, which weren't necessarily inferior to their AMOLED counterparts. Regardless, for those with more sensitive eyes, a lot of the budget OLED panels have maybe a certain refresh rate frequency, also known as PWM, that may affect some users out there, and for those folks, the overall LCD screen might be less fatiguing. That being said, the visual experience is definitely not going to be quite as saturated or eye-popping. Still, it offers generous enough viewing angles as a LCD screen, and overall brightness, I would say, is decent. Under moderate lighting conditions, it should still be visible even if it's not as bright, again, as some of the highest quality OLED panels out there. A smaller bezel here at the very bottom, but it's not bad overall. Relatively decent looking bezels, along with an 8 megapixel selfie camera in the hole punch cutout. Otherwise, the Corning Gorilla Glass protected touchscreen feels pretty responsive to navigate around. We have the typical Android newsfeed there on the left, and all of the standard Google Essentials can also be found here, of course. Motorola also pairs it with a couple of their custom utility tools, such as a voice recorder, which is actually quite helpful. In addition, they have a built-in FM radio, which is another relic that we don't really see these days. And the radio here can even be used if you don't have headphones plugged in to act as an amplifier for the antenna, which is impressive. With just the loudspeaker, you can still play back radio, but the signal strength might be a little bit weaker. Now, when you are in the regular radio app here, you can also easily scan to take a look at what channels are strongest in your area. You can even record radio sessions, take a closer look at other channels that you favorited, and also play back some of your recordings. So it's actually a pretty fully featured radio app when you're trying to catch up on news or discover new music and you're away from internet connectivity, for instance. But speaking of, the antenna reception was very good with both Wi-Fi dual band in addition to 5G connectivity. I was consistently getting around 3 to 4 bars here in the Seattle suburbs. Never really found myself disconnected from networks, offering generally reliable web browsing speeds, as you can tell here. So the Snapdragon, again 4 Gen 1, is not going to be a flagship chip by any means, but it has definitely improved compared to past Snapdragon 400 series processors. This in fact benchmarks a little bit higher than the older Snapdragon 680, which is also popular on other budget phones. So as you can tell here, you just get a little bit higher CPU as well as GPU performance. The Antutu score here being a little bit north of 400K compared to 300K. Again, it's not going to be too shabby at all for just simple tasks like web browsing. Even opening up different links, as you can tell here, is going to be almost instantaneous, even for more demanding websites like The Verge or New York Times with plenty of videos and ads on the page. It all loads in a pretty reasonable amount of time as well. And the 120 Hz refresh rate of the screen definitely makes it feel a little bit more snappy. That being said, what's not so great is there is unfortunately some bloatware that typically gets bundled with some of the recent Motorola devices. So when you're first setting up the device, it will try to install some quote-unquote essential apps, including games like Monopoly, even Temu, in addition to, again, some of these kind of services like Uber, for example, that you can opt out of some by checking them off. But it can result in some services that you may not be using necessarily. Luckily, all of these applications you can just uninstall, taking a minute or two for cleaning things up, but you can end up with a relatively clean experience afterwards that looks something like this. And one final peek here at the more advanced settings. I'll just mention that going into System, you're able to go into a Performance. This is where you can jump into the virtual RAM expansion, allowing you to kind of augment the 4 gigs of RAM with additional virtual RAM up to 8 gigabytes total, although whenever you change some of these settings, the phone will have to restart. Additionally, under Display Properties, you can also take a look at colors to go into a more saturated look versus natural and change the temperature from colder to warmer. Not to mention the refresh rate, you can also dial down to something like regular 60 Hz or the faster 120. Responsiveness is generally not too problematic. Of course, if you're opening up, I would say more than a dozen apps, then of course the phone will start to chug a little bit more, but just for a more casual, everyday use, it still seems to be mostly decent. Let's jump into a quick look here at the camera. Maybe one thing I'm not the biggest fan of is Motorola's camera UI might be simplifying things a little bit too much. So there's only the ability for you to choose between quote-unquote standard versus high. without the label for the specific megapixels on the side. So I would like them to add that detail in. Everything else though is pretty fully stacked, such as auto HDR. You can also apply auto Google Lens for you to scan different objects that you're unfamiliar with, including barcodes. You can turn on grid composition, geotagging your location, as well as aspect ratio, and even turning on and off a auto night vision. And like more expensive phones, you get motion photos as well, capturing a short animation of around 2 or 3 seconds. You can tap to focus and also adjust the exposure settings using the dial here as well, and instantly tap to go into the macro versus the primary camera. That being said, there is no way to quickly jump into something like a 2x magnification. If you tap on the 1x, it brings up a slider that you can then use to kind of magnify up to 8x digitally, or again slide up and down to go into a different number. However, I would have liked them to add maybe just a quick shortcut to jump into 2x at a click. Some additional filters for changing the scene properties can be played with, and then we can slide left and right to capture slow motion. Video here kind of tops up at 1080p, so you won't get 4K capture, but kind of expected for a budget phone in this price category. It does have very good electronic image stabilization, however, in well-lit environments. It almost feels like you are recording kind of like on a gimbal. It does crop in a bit more into your footage, but it's actually quite still. And you can go into the portrait, artificial bokeh, even change the intensity of the blur, in addition to a pro mode that allows you to change more specific properties like ISO, white balance manually, in addition to even giving you a histogram view over here if your image is getting overexposed. That being said, even in the pro mode, you don't really get the ability to change the specific resolution in a way that you're able to see labeled. So again, that is one thing I would like to see changed in future updates. Under More, you can also go into a night mode in addition to dual capture that takes both an image using the rear and the front cameras simultaneously, plus a panorama and time-lapse functions can also be found. There's even audio zoom, by the way, so if you are pinching in as you're recording video, it will also zoom in to the audio source of what you are pointing the camera at. Briefly reviewing some sample footage, again in well-lit environments, you still get plenty of details. Colors are actually quite vibrant looking, so if you're taking some quick snaps and preserving some memories when on the go, it shouldn't be too problematic. It's not going to beat the latest iPhone or Pixel, it still is a competent performer, and here's also a quick kind of video demo as well. Again, pretty decent stabilization using the EIS. Here's one more example taken outdoors, and again, plenty of kind of colors in the leaves of the trees here in the background, as well as some of the texture in the skies are still retained thanks to the HDR processing. In the standard image mode, by the way, photos will be binned down to around 12 megapixels, taking up roughly 11 megabytes of space, but you can also shoot in the higher res mode and it allows you to crop in a little bit further if desired. Now here's also an example of the 2 megapixel macro lens. Once again, I think an ultra wide angle would be more practical, but you are able to get some trick shots, zooming in a little bit closer to your objects, even if detail is going to be a bit limited, and it doesn't have OIS, so you have to hold pretty still. That being said, even the primary camera can focus pretty close to objects. So the irony there is if you actually do something like a crop on the main camera using the full 50 megapixels, you might get comparable results, if not better, just by simply zooming in. Although it's far from being the best camera that we've ever tested, it still is, I think, more than good enough for most folks looking for just a casual shooter. One setting that I do like, though, is you can press here to customize whether you want to turn on the AI Auto Enhance function, or if you prefer a more natural-looking photo. It's not quite as vibrant or contrasty. The Pro Mode also allows us to capture in both RAW as well as JPEG file formats, in addition to allowing us to control even the focus distance. So next, let's move into a quick demo of what the built-in speakers sound like by playing back a YouTube clip. Overall takeaway that the stereo speakers are an excellent addition on a budget phone like this. It's a great decision on Motorola's part that definitely improves on the audio experience, getting plenty loud, doesn't sound too thin or distorted even at higher volumes, and just gives you more of that immersive feel as you're consuming content on here, like on YouTube or Netflix. The screen itself, again, is also better than expected, looking at just the specs alone. In fact, colors are really not bad, for an IPS LCD screen. And as far as moving into some light gameplay is concerned, again, this processor is still good enough to handle casual gaming, similar to kind of older Snapdragon 600 series processors of yesteryear. You can definitely play back most games in the Play Store without too many issues. In fact, even PUBG and Asphalt, as well as Minecraft, will still play if you just are more modest about your expectations. If you lower some of the graphic settings, for example, and it may take a little longer for the titles to load, but after it does load up, you can still expect a good enough experience. The phone is also, again, energy efficient enough that it doesn't really get too warm or hot. Even after longer than, say, 30 or 40 minutes, it still remains comfortable when you're holding it. So thermal throttling is generally not an issue that you'll experience on this particular device. Luckily, performance remains pretty stable even as you're using it continuously. So that is more or less it as far as our hands-on review of the Moto G 5G 2024. That name is kind of a mouthful, but this is basically the base version of the Moto G series. And it is nostalgic in a way to see, again, Motorola still making these G-series devices, because aside from Samsung's Galaxy S line, which is on the flagship side, I think almost all of the other manufacturers have either stopped making phones over the years, like HTC and LG again, or in other cases, they've just rebooted their entire lineup, changed up the identity, as well as the naming structure. And in the case of this year's revision, I would say there are some nice incremental upgrades from a more refined design that makes it look more luxurious, especially in this Coach Prime Special Edition with gold and black, in addition to having pretty much all the other features that you would be looking for on a phone, such as a fast and reliable fingerprint scanner, a slim and lightweight design, but also having a large battery, built-in stereo speakers, headphone jack, in addition to NFC for contactless mobile payment, responsive enough processor that supports 5G for getting the basics done are all good attributes. So all things considered, really is not a bad phone, and gotta say that, again, this Coach Prime Edition just makes it look a bit more unique from a color scheme perspective, if you are a fan of this black and gold aesthetic, that is. You can learn more details if interested in the links down below, but for now that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That's been a closer look at the Moto G 5G here in 2024.